Hello, I am Gwendolyn Dowell and I am a university student. Today, I bring you a topic that affects me personally, the hidden roadblocks faced by disabled students. Defining the problem. People are not defined by a single factor, but rather by a complex combination of their identities, which we call intersectionality. Intersectionality is a way of analyzing complexity in the world, in people, and in human experience. When disadvantages based on race, class, and disability meet, they form interlocking, mutually constructing systems of power that lead to unique forms of oppression. At the same time, we must also examine privilege, which refers to unearned access to benefits and resources experienced by some people, often at the expense of others. Intersectionality is a tool to challenge the notion that these categories are experienced as mutually exclusive, showing instead how individuals experience different degrees of privilege and oppression depending on where they themselves categorically fall. Unfair labeling. Historically, the concept of disability itself has been used to justify exclusion and other forms of oppression. Before the landmark Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, substandard services, segregated placements, and flawed evaluations were common in the field of special education. Today, one key factor perpetuating injustice is the racialization of disability in education. Students of color are disproportionately placed into special education, often assigned soft disability categories like emotionally disturbed or ADHD. This practice of labeling and segregating students allows schools to mask deeper racial biases under the guise of providing necessary special education services. This segregation often persisted even after school desegregation efforts, suggesting that disability served as a new mechanism for removing students of color from mainstream classrooms. For Black students, for instance, this results in high rates of placement in segregated classrooms and subjection to disciplinary consequences, contributing directly to the school-to-prison pipeline. Systemic roadblocks. The pervasive problems faced by students are deeply rooted in belief systems, often summarized by constructs ending in ism, such as conservatism, racism, or egalitarianism. These systems guide individual and group behavior. These belief systems contribute to the production and maintenance of privilege, or unearned access to advantages. Societal forces like race, class, and gender function as institutionalized power systems that result in individuals being differentially advantaged or disadvantaged. In organizations that strive for equity, power is a complex process embedded in relationships used for control, operating across structural or social institutions, disciplinary rules or procedures, interpersonal relationships, and cultural/hegemonic ideology domains. For example, studies in human service organizations show that formally educated white employees tend to be better positioned to access privilege, often receiving preferential access to influential relationships and learning resources. Navigating hostility in college. In higher education, students with disabilities often face difficulties securing accommodations due to unwilling or ignorant instructors. These faculty members may respond with belittling, discrimination, or harassment when accommodations are requested, such as needing notes in advance or a captioner for statistics courses. This behavior, a form of bullying, creates hostile learning environments. This reflects how media acts as a pervasive and constant filter for how we perceive reality, influencing our perspective based on our own complex identities of race, ethnicity, class, and gender. Media frequently reinforces harmful societal beliefs by portraying disability and poverty as individual problems that must be overcome by the person rather than systemic societal failures. Mental and cognitive health issues, while ubiquitous in visual media, are often framed as personal tragedies intended to invoke sympathy and make non disabled audiences feel better about their own normality. For example, conditions like obsessive compulsive disorder or OCD and autism are often reduced to disability mascots, otherwise known as lovable, amusing characters where the disability is paradoxically linked to exceptional ability. Recommendations: fix the system, not the individual. To combat these issues, we must shift from the medical model, which focuses on the individual's impairment, towards the social model of disability, which focuses on removing academic, social, and environmental barriers to participation. The shift must incorporate disability as a dimension of culture within multicultural education. Traditional multicultural education often overlooks disability, focusing primarily on racial or gender differences. However, like other dimensions of diversity, disability has its own history, and individuals with disabilities are subject to prejudices and stereotypes. Conceptualizing disability as a dimension of culture and moving beyond perceiving it as abnormality or deficit is essential for addressing exclusion. Inclusion by design. The practical strategy for systemic change is the implementation of universal design for learning. UDL means adapting instruction, curriculum, and materials to be accessible to the widest range of students rather than relying solely on individual accommodations after the fact. For meaningful participation, there needs to be universal, reasonable accommodation and accessibility across all services and activities. Empowering education. To foster critical consciousness, we must move away from simply memorizing facts or the banking concept toward adopting a dialogical pedagogy. Critical education involves analyzing the world by asking tough questions and engaging in problem solving. This critical inquiry must emphasize relationality, which rejects binary thinking and instead focuses on how systems of power, like race, class, and gender, mutually influence one another. This approach supports developing a critical consciousness about how intersectional systems of power are organized against structural, disciplinary, cultural, and interpersonal domains. Dialogical education thus helps negotiate differences and transform conflict into a generative resource, providing tools for self-awareness and empowerment by teaching students to critique the social hierarchies they are embedded within. What you can do. If we can agree that these systemic injustices must end, here are the specific areas where I request your support and advocacy for actionable change. Dismantling structural isms. Challenge institutional policies and processes that reflect and perpetuate societal ideologies of race, class, and gender supremacy, recognizing how systems maintain and distribute privilege. Fund comprehensive training. Mandate and fund ongoing training for all faculty and administrators, especially concerning graduate level STEM coursework, recognizing disability as a critical dimension of culture. Challenge cultural narratives. Advocate for policies and practices that challenge media depictions that rely on disability stereotypes and limit opportunities for disabled artists. And prioritize structural change. Push for institutional policy changes that resist the reduction of social justice to cultural competence metrics and ensure true equity and accessibility. To conclude, social injustice against students with disabilities and intersecting identities is rooted in structural systems reinforced by unexamined beliefs or isms and maintained by cultural narratives, such as those found in media. To dismantle these deeply embedded oppressive systems, we must critically reflect on how institutions perpetuate societal ideologies that privilege some while marginalizing others. By adopting the social model, integrating universal accessibility, and demanding critical inquiry that challenges the status quo, we can transform education systems in America to truly serve all students. The challenge is to move beyond viewing these issues through single lenses and embrace the complexity of identity and how its power plays a role in everyday life. Thank you.